What is up, everybody? Sven Diesel here. We're going to be tying up a Frenchie nymph. This is in the jig style. We're using a jigged hook, and this is a pattern that goes back a long ways. You can see it's just a nymph. It's primarily used by competition anglers, but has also caught a lot of trend here in recent years with Euro nymphing. So let's get started. We got a Moonlit ML056 in the vise. We've got a tungsten bead on here. I've used tungsten primarily on all of my jig hooks here. You don't have to use lead wraps, you still can, but I like using the tungsten because this is about sized properly. You can also oversize it to get it down quicker. And so we're going to go ahead and get started with some wax thread. This is a Semperfli in an 8/0. You could also go a little bit lighter with a 12/0, but I think this helps to build up the body the way I like it. And the way I do this is I kind of start this right here behind the bead, making sure it's oriented properly, do a few wraps, work my way down a little further, come back up, and then you can see now that bead is secure by going up and down about 3 times. And we already started a nice little taper here, and that way I don't have to worry about positioning that slotted bead into the jig later on. And so a little trick here I do with my wire. This is some 0.2 millimeter Semperfli wire. I like to shove it up into that slot. I don't know if that helps, but it has confidence in tying it. You can see it just fits in there real nicely, and that way we keep this wire on the top of the shank, and as we get to that hook point I kind of twist it over to the side, which will help later on our first wrap. You can see how it kind of skews over, and it really helps with that first wrap when we're counter ribbing this. So we'll kind of set that aside. Now I do my wire first, and then I put my tailing material on for a couple reasons. This is some Coq de Leon. I'm going to take about 5 or 6 fibers, trying to orient those tips properly when I pull them off of the stem. And the reason the wire I put in first is that way the wire is already in position. That first wrap is going to be our taper of the body. And it just has been kind of a little trick I learned a little bit ago, and I've kind of adapted it to most of my patterns. So for the tail, I'm going to have it roughly the length of the shank, and we want to make sure that these fibers stay on the top of the shank of the hook, keeping them trapped together the best we can. I do about 3 or 4 wraps, checking my length to make sure it's where I want it, and then kind of while you go back, it helps to have your wire out of the way. And as you go back, the way you can measure if you've gone too far is if you do extra wraps, the fibers will start to go down the bend. You want them to come about straight off, and I always do an under wrap here on most of my Coq de Leon tails, just to kind of group those fibers together. And you can see it kind of went a little bit down, so let's go ahead and move our thread over, and there we go. That looks pretty good. And then make sure, I've probably moved this wire one too many times, that it's not going to come off or come untwisted. Now for the body on this, we're going to be using some pheasant tail fibers. I take about 4 to 5. I don't really count these depending on if I'm going bigger or smaller. And these tips are a little fragile, and I know that we don't need them, and so I'm just going to go ahead and cut those out and kind of splay it across here and start wrapping that towards the back where our wire's tied in, just on the top of the shank with some nice securing wraps. And then I'll crank down, work my way up, kind of fill in that taper where we just tied in those butt ends. But you can see with this thread we didn't really build much body, and we're good to go. So let's go ahead and start by wrapping this first wrap over, avoiding that hook point at all costs. That will break the fibers. And then I'll come up and over, and then start to let those fibers kind of fan out. And then as I work my way up, I'm just rotating these the same way I did my thread. Make sure you know which way you're wrapping these at this point. You can also, if you got big thumbs like I do, you can use some hackle pliers at this point. But the reason you want to pay attention to which way you wrap it is we're going to counter rib this with the wire for durability and strength, and also to add segmentation. So let's trim out those butt ends. Now here's where it helps that we tighten in our wire first. So I'm just going to bring that right up and over, right there, right over those tailing materials. So we just bound down our Coq de Leon fibers, and then we're right into the body. I used to have a problem with having a big segmentation, a big jump, a big hump right there at the back, and then this is one way that I've avoided that by tying in that wire first. So we'll go ahead and get about 5 to 6 wraps up this body. This is a size 16 hook, and then we'll secure that wire with some wraps in front and behind, go ahead and snip it out with some flush cutters. You can also twist it off, and then I use my fingernail to just push that wire down into that thread, and we've got a nice little thread base here for the next step. That looks pretty good. I really like how that came out, and the tails didn't shift. So for this collar, we're going to be doing some Semperfli eye stub. I really like this blue and the green, and I use the pink a lot, and I've also got into the gold and a little bit of this purple. But you can see this stuff is just really awesome. You need about 4 strands. You can see I got too much here, so let's go ahead and just get rid of some of these. And then I'm going to twist this onto my thread really tight. This eye stub, I don't know why this Semperfli stuff, but it just really grips on to this thread. That's why I really love it. I've always loved their eye stub. And then I'll just go ahead with that tight dubbing on my thread, go ahead and just build up a little collar here. And then as I work my way up around here, I'm going to build up a hot spot, and so I kind of just pull those fibers back. If I got any long stragglers, I'll just pull them out with my thumb. And then we're going to add the hot spot here. Since I'm using white thread, I'm just doing a Sharpie. I usually do orange hot spot, red hot spot, yellow, and pink seems to be another of my favorite. And we'll go ahead and just build up that hot spot, doing about a 5 to 6 turn whip finish, covering up all our white thread. And we'll go ahead and secure that. And then a little trick here is I always bring my thread up to the top, or which would be the bottom of this fly when it's going through the water column. And that way when I put my resin, everything is just kind of binding down into that slot on the bead. And so I just put a little dab there, let it seep down in. That's going into the wire that's in there. It's going into the thread. It's getting a little bit of the eye stub if you're not careful. You want to kind of avoid that because I want my eye stub to flow freely. But you can see this is awesome right here. I usually just take these off, throw them in my box, and I fish them. But if you really want it to be a little bit more effective, I usually take a little bit of Velcro. I got a little Stonfo brush here, and I just hit it a couple times. I guess I had a little bit extra dubbing on here from a few times ago. Just hit it a little bit to kind of just get those fibers out. But after you catch a few fish, it's going to look like that anyway. So color combinations are endless. Tie some up, fish them, hope they pierce some lips.